Okay, so we're going to have a look at setting up audio between BaseHead and another application. So this might be something that we have to do if we're not able to get audio working between BaseHead and a DAW at the same time, or maybe we just need to send audio from BaseHead into a channel in our DAW so that we can hear what effects we're going to use in our project. Whatever the reason is, if we need to send audio from BaseHead into a channel in our DAW, there's a couple of supported methods that are built straight into BaseHead, and there are also additional third-party methods which we'll touch on, but we're not going to go too into depth in those. So the official methods that BaseHead supports for sending audio between BaseHead and another application is using Rewire, and also using a sort of modern replacement for Rewire called Source Nexus. Now, all this information is available in the BaseHead knowledge base. So if you go to the BaseHead knowledge base, you'll find that there is an FAQ section for setting up for PC, for Rewire and Source Nexus. There is also a section for macOS as well. And this will detail everything that you need to do to configure either Rewire or Source Nexus to get audio between applications. So what we're going to do is we're going to just have a look at the Rewire method first, and then we'll check out how to do the exact same setup with Source Nexus. Now, if we want to use Rewire, the first thing we need to be sure of is that the DAW that we're using, or the application that we're using, has Rewire support built in. So Rewire is a protocol that actually needs to be built directly into the host and also into the client. It's a method that's been around for many years, since the 90s, and it's actually been discontinued. Now, this is one of the reasons why we do suggest, if you're having issues or it's not a reliable connection, to maybe consider looking at the more modern replacements for Rewire, such as Source Nexus, which will basically work with anything out there that can accept a plugin. But Rewire is actually built into BaseHead with this little Rewire switch here. In order for the Rewire system to connect to a host, both the client and the host must be running. In this case, I'm using Reaper. What we need to do is enable this. Now, we might actually find, even though Reaper is running, if I try and enable this, I actually still get the error message saying that the Rewire host is not found. Now, this can actually be due to the simple fact that I have not added a track into Reaper yet to accept the Rewire connection. So in order to get Rewire connected to Reaper here, the first thing I'm going to need to do is add in a channel. So the process might be a bit different depending on which DAW you're using. You would have to look up how to actually add Rewire into your DAW. But I'm going to add a new track here, and in Reaper, in order to add Rewire support, I will just click the effects slot here, and I'm just going to search for Rewire. And we'll see that all of the Rewire clients that have been installed that have actually reported to the system that they are a Rewire compatible client will be listed in here. BaseHead will be listed as one of them. So if we click the BaseHead option here, we will then get the configuration for Rewire thrown up here. Now, we're not interested in MIDI because we don't deal with MIDI. We're just dealing with audio here. So we've got two channels of audio set up here, front, left, front, right. This will be set up by default because we've just got a standard stereo track. If I go back into BaseHead now and activate the Rewire button, we are now locked in and we're ready to go. So just before I switch back to Reaper, a few things to point out here is if I go to the options, we'll see that it says here that Rewire is enabled and the audio is all disabled here. One thing that I would suggest is to disable the release driver option here. Otherwise, what's going to happen is when we switch back to Reaper, when BaseHead loses focus, it's going to actually stop playback. So if we want BaseHead and Reaper to be played at the same time, we just need to make sure that we don't have the release driver option. The same would be in Reaper as well. There is an option in Reaper to release the audio driver. Just make sure that that is not enabled either. So from here, the only other thing that you really need to make sure of is that you are actually monitoring your track input. Now, again, depending on how your DAW works, you would need to just make sure that you know how to monitor a track's input. And basically now, if we switch back into BaseHead and click on some files, we'll be able to hear these, and we'll also see that the meters are actually peaking in Reaper here. So if I adjust the slider here, we now have audio piped in. That's basically as complicated as it gets. Now, the only thing here would be if I switch to a library, for instance, this library here, that has multi-channel files, we'll see that when I select a multi-channel file, It is playing, but we're only getting stereo audio playing into Reaper here. Now, if we want to send multi-channel audio from BaseHead into our DAW, what we would need to do is actually configure this in the track that we've added it on. So in Reaper here, if I just go into the route options, we'll see that the track is currently a 2-channel track. So if I change this to a 6-channel track, for instance, we now have 6 channels to play with. And up here, instead of just having 1 and 2 channels, we can now click on each of these and assign each of these to the additional channels. And then what this will do is when we come back and play this file again, we will see that we have all 6 channels available. So another method that BaseHead supports is Source Nexus. Now this is something that's been around for macOS for a couple of years now, but has been recently updated to work with Windows as well. Now what Source Nexus does is it creates a virtual audio output, which you can then feed into a track using a plugin of whichever DAW that you're using. So one of the great things about Source Nexus as opposed to Rewire is the host and the client don't actually have to have compatibility built into them. It's something that can be added on top easily. So to get Source Nexus, they do have a free trial and definitely worth downloading and testing this out. So just download the free trial, set it up and just make sure it's going to work. But looking at setting this up with between BaseHead and Reaper here, we do have in newer versions of BaseHead direct integration built in for Source Nexus. So when you've got it installed, after installation, you'll be able to just simply engage the Source Nexus button. And what this will do is this will just set the audio output correct, and it will also disable things like the release driver option, which we recommend to disable. If you don't have one of the latest versions of BaseHead, which has this Source Nexus button on the results page here, all you need to do is go to the audio output and set the Source Nexus B output, and then just make sure that the release driver option is disabled. Now, before using Source Nexus with BaseHead, what we first need to do is make sure it's configured correctly on the system. So when we install it, one of the installation options it gives us is how many audio devices do we want to install, do we want to use. We only need to install the default 2 audio devices, so that will be a Source Nexus A and a Source Nexus B option. So we'll see here that we've got A and B. You can install more if you have a need for it, but for this purpose we just need Source Nexus A and B, and in fact we're only using Source Nexus B. Now, after installation, one of the first things we do need to do is make sure that the sample rate and the bit depth are set correctly. So what we need to do is open up our sound settings. So if we go down to our speaker in the taskbar here and go into sounds, then we want to go to the playback tab. So in the playback tab here, we scroll down, we'll see all of our audio devices. Then we'll see a Source Nexus A and a Source Nexus B option. What we want to do is open up the Source Nexus B option. And what we need to do in here is make sure we go to the Advanced tab and set how many channels we want to be using in this instance. So if we want to be able to send multi-channel audio between BaseHead and our DAW, we need to make sure that we set up the required number of channels, the bit depth and the sample rate. Now these should be matching the sample rate and bit depth that we're actually using within our Reaper project. Then also make sure that on the levels tab here, it's not set to minimum or muted. Then we need to switch to the recording tab and just make sure that the Source Nexus B option here matches the Source Nexus B options in the playback tab as well. Now, once we've got all of this set up, all we need to do in our DAW, if we switch back here, is we need to just add an effects slot. And if we search in here for Source Nexus, we should find that we have a Source Nexus plugin. So if you don't see this, you'll need to just check your host's VST folders. Make sure that where you've installed the VST plugin for Source Nexus, that it's actually been scanned into your host. We simply add this into the host. And then you'll see that we're receiving audio from Source Nexus B, and this is why we select B. You'll see that we're receiving up to 6 channels of audio here. And if we've configured our channels in our DAW, so in here I've got 6 channels to be received here, then we should have up to 6 channels now that we can receive into our DAW here. So if we just switch back to BaseHead and we try and play this file, we'll now see that the audio is now coming through into Reaper and is coming through into this track here. We have all 6 channels flowing into here, and we have control over this. So in addition to the methods that we recommend and support, there is also a lot of other options out there that are available, such as this one here that we've discovered, which is called Voice Meter. So Voice Meter is like a replacement for your Windows mixer. And what it does is it allows you to use multiple audio interfaces along with virtual inputs and outputs to make quite a complex mix matrix between applications. So one of the neat things about this one is that we can take physical inputs and outputs from multiple audio devices, send those into and out of different applications, and also use virtual inputs and outputs between software as well. Now, there is a little bit of setup involved in installing this and configuring the inputs and outputs. Definitely worth watching some of the demonstration videos, and there are also different versions available depending on the flexibility that you need. So the standard version is probably all that you would actually need, but if you go up to the more fully featured versions, there's a lot of configuration that you can apply. Now, one other thing to point out with this is that it is donationware, so it is completely free to use. You can donate if you really like the application, if you want to support its development, but you can download this and use it for whatever purpose you need without it costing anything. So it's worth giving it a go. But yeah, it's a bit beyond the scope of sort of what we can demonstrate how to set up. So we don't actually offer any support for this. It's just something that is worth pointing out, that is another very useful application.